We are finally doing our off-season outlook on the New York Mets. What are the needs they need to address? How can they do that through free agency and trades? What will this team look like in 2023? I'm going to give you my best guess on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor, where I also just wrote the Mets offseason outlook. And we're doing this for all 30 teams. Essentially, the point of this article series is you get into a GM hat and you put on, the one for the Mets. You pretend you're Billy Epler. You go through and you try to dissect what problems need to be addressed this offseason and how the team can address those issues. I also wrote one over the weekend on the Washington Nationals. So these are a really, fun set of articles to read through. And I wanted to take, what I came up with on the Mets and turn into a podcast today, because as much as we have gone through all these different issues on various podcasts since the season ended, I haven't really put it together in one, compact off-season outlook blueprint for what I think they should do. And I want to start here today with the offense, because I think that their lineup is the most put together. It's the area that they don't have to address much because you're returning most of your players here. This season, as we've discussed in the past, there were 7 above-average starters on the Mets based on FWAR, which is wins above replacement, and WRC+, which is weighted runs created plus. Now, you look at the FWAR. For all the Mets starters, okay, all of them outside of catcher, it was a 2.3 FWAR or higher. That was Eduardo Escobar on the low end. So at least getting 2 wins from all of your starters across the board, that's great production because there wasn't any glaring holes. And Escobar maybe was that, but then he was so good in September that he erased it. Now, WRC+, again, measuring hitters based on a league average of 100, every single hitter in the Mets' main lineup outside of the catcher position was at 106 or better. Again, Escobar is the bottom end of that. But then you look at the rest of the lineup beyond him, 127 WRC+ or better. Francisco Lindor, based on this metric, was the third worst hitter on the team in the starting lineup every day. Now, that's not fair to him based on everything we saw, but it more shows the value of each of these other guys, the type of at-bats they were getting from a Mark Canha at a 128 WRC+, Brandon Nimmo 134, Starling Marte 136, and then Jeff McNeil and Pete Alonso at 143. The only one from that group you're losing is Nimmo. That's the guy you have to replace, but you also have Daniel Vogelbach, who had a 144 WRC+ in 55 games. He could be part of your answer at DH. You got Louis Guillorme, who had a 106 WRC+ and 1.3 FWAR. Really good defensive player. You know that you're set as a backup infielder there. With Guillorme, you're pretty much locked and loaded. You got Darren Ruff, Dom Smith, James McCann. These are guys that are on the roster that you would maybe hope aren't on the roster, although I could see a pathway for Ruff to compete with Vientos, which I know fans aren't going to like to hear, but he's cheap enough where they could try to see what happens in spring training and always maybe flip him to another team during spring as well if he looks good. Dom Smith, I think you either non-tender him or trade him. James McCann with Francisco Alvarez on the precipice, it would behoove the Mets to try to move him. That would require eating a lot of money on that contract, but you only have a couple years left now. It's getting a little bit easier to swallow. He is a good leader. You could probably find a team that's rebuilding that would need a catcher for a young pitching staff that you could send James McCann to if you ate about half that contract. If you turn him from a $10+ million player to a $5 million player, maybe teams would consider it. You also have, when you're looking at this team, Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, Francisco Alvarez. These are all guys who made their debut this season, top prospects who could factor into the mix. For Beatty, he could be your starting third baseman, pushing Eduardo Escobar to a bench DH role. for Francisco Alvarez. He could be your starting catcher, making James McCann even more expendable. And then you have a backstop of Alvarez and Nido, which I think is really the ideal situation that you're trying to get to. Vientos could be part of the DH platoon with Vogelback, as we discussed ad nauseum throughout the season, but if the Mets want better, that would be another area to address. So if you're looking at their needs overall, it's what do you do with Brandon Nimmo? If you don't retain him, you have to replace him in the outfield. Some of the options there, as we've already discussed, Aaron Judge is the high end of we're trying to improve the team drastically. Let's go get ourselves an Aaron Judge to just completely juice up this lineup in an immense way, and also help our defense a little bit, because he would certainly be the one option I'd look at in free agency that could actually bring offensive value that would not be a loss defensively as far as a drop-off from Nimmo. Beyond that, Michael Conforto, an option, which we'll discuss on tomorrow's show. I just wrote a free agent profile on Conforto. I want to dive into that a bit because I think he actually makes a lot of sense. If you lose Nimmo and you're looking to spend money on the rotation, Conforto could be a happy medium where you get a guy that could start out there that won't break the bank too much. Jock Peterson, off a great year, he would add pop to the lineup that you could use desperately. So I like Peterson as an option to play left field. That would, though, put you in a bad spot as far as, what, did you put Canna in right then? Did you put Canna in center? Not a good defensive outfield if you go Jock Peterson, but maybe as a DH corner guy, it's an option still. Mitch Haniger, one guy that you could look at. Andrew Benintendi's out there. I don't think he's a great fit because, to me, if you're going to get Benintendi, you might as well spend a little bit more for Nimmo. Not going to give you the power you want in the outfield if you are moving off someone with the great on-base prowess of a Nimmo. Kevin Kiermaier, defensive-only type guy. He could be a center fielder for you, but I don't love that as the Mets offseason. If they drop off from Nimmo to Kiermaier, the team definitely got worse. David Peralta in the corner could be an option, but really, for looking at starting-level outfielders, I really come back to Judge, Nimmo, and Conforto as really the viable options that I like. Now we go to DH. Shohei Ohtani we discussed last week. That's obviously the pie-in-the-sky dream scenario, but in free agency, a couple of names to look at. JD Martinez and Jose Abreu as far as right-handed bats to complement Vogelback. Justin Turner could be a free agent as well. All those guys a bit older. Abreu by far the best option of the three. Martinez, you do wonder if he's on the wrong side of his career. You're starting to see that a bit this past season. Turner still looks great, but do we actually think Justin Turner would, A, come back to the Mets and be good when he did? For some reason, I just doubt the viability of that option, but it was worth mentioning. And obviously, you can see the Mets do a multitude of things on the trade market, but when it comes to free agency, I think if you nab one of Judge, Nimmo, or Conforto for the outfield, you're pretty much set, and I would almost be okay with it if they rolled out a lineup with just what they have and trust that the kids will fill in the DH spot behind the plate and at third base where they maybe had some weaknesses this past season. But what will they do with the pitching staff? That is where this conversation gets rather confusing, honestly, and we will get to that in just a minute. But first, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-minute scores for every sport out there. As I record this, we have yet to see Game 3 of the World Series. As you're listening, this will have affected the lines. But right now, it is plus 150 Phillies, minus 170 Astros to win the World Series. Whoever wins today, that is going to impact those odds, and you might have a chance, let's just say the Phillies grab this one to get the Astros closer to even money, which still is probably the best bet considering they are the deeper team. This is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now we get into the Mets starting rotation, and you could lose Jacob deGrom, Chris Bassett, Carlos Carrasco, and Taijuan Walker from this year's rotation. That is 4 starters. Very tough to overcome that if you were to lose all of them. The depth chart that you currently have in place before making any additions, it's Max Scherzer, David Peterson, question marks. Now, Tyler McGill obviously factors into the mix, as does Joey Lucchesi. Also, Jose Budo saw his debut this year. He's on the 40. I really look at him as a far back-end depth guy, but still a depth guy none the same. If you want 8 starters on your depth chart, maybe 9 going into the season, with one of them being a swingman type, Budo can be one of those 8 or 9 in my opinion. Now, you need, though, to address the rotation, you have to replace DeGrom, and I also believe you have to replace a Bassett type, whether that's with Chris Bassett or with someone that you view as a better Game 3 starter if you were to get to the postseason. The simplest way to address the depth of this rotation is to pick up Carlos Carrasco's option. $14 million to $3 million buyout. Essentially, 1 year, $11 million is kind of your net difference there. There's not going to be another pitcher you can find of his caliber at that price tag. Maybe something close to it, but you're negotiating with all 30 teams on these guys. So do you really want to make sure you get the opportunity to have Nathan Eovaldi in that spot, or just simply bring back Carrasco when you know all it takes is accepting that option? If you do that, now it's Scherzer, Carrasco, Peterson, McGill, Lucchesi. So now you're getting to the point where, yeah, you have a 5-man rotation, but you want to grab 2 more guys to really improve it, and guys that you would think would start in a playoff series. So Jacob deGrom is the obvious one. If not him, in free agency, there's really 2 names that jump out: Carlos Rodon or Justin Verlander. You need to nab one of those 3. Then I would say probably the trade market, but through free agency, some of the names that would be interesting: Nathan Eovaldi, I just mentioned; Luis Severino, the Yankees turned down his $15 million club option; Tyler Anderson, off a great season with the Dodgers. Trade market, Brandon Woodruff is an option. You still have a couple of years left to control on him. Tyler Glasnow, 1 year left. He's an interesting, high ceiling option the Mets could target if the Rays are looking to move off him before he hits free agency. And then you got Pablo Lopez from the Marlins. I don't know what type of in-division tax you would have to spend to acquire him. I sent a trade proposal to Aram Layton today, who is a big-time Marlins fan, and he said that he would want me to delete my number off his phone. He wanted to block me because of the offer that I presented to him was that bad in his opinion. But I thought it made some sense, which was eating Jorge Soler's contract, $15 million this upcoming season. He would be, someone that has the upside at DH, to mash lefties, but had a horrible season where he was injured. So that would be good for the Marlins. The Mets would get Lopez, and then the trade I sent him was Mark Vientos and Ronnie Mauricio as the prospects. Dom Smith, and also Jake Mangum, another prospect. Dom being a flyer change of scenery guy, Jake Mangum being a high floor center field option that the Marlins could throw out there defensively, who actually has the opportunity, I believe, to hit for a high average at the next level. And then it'd be how much do you love Mark Vientos and Mauricio as prospects. Arm hated it. Who knows? I think that Pablo Lopez is on the table. I would not trade Brett Baty or Francisco Alvarez for Pablo Lopez, which could make it impossible to get him, but that's where I'm at with it. I think that Brett Baty and Alvarez are too important to your future. Vientos being the center of a trade package for a starter would be ideal. Just a matter of, can you find the team that's willing to take him as that centerpiece, and what else do you have to throw in? Because I don't know how much other teams are valuing Vientos and Mauricio to headline these packages. You might have to throw in an arm that you maybe didn't want to trade that's in the farm system. You could also see an opportunity potentially with some of these teams to package a Mauricio Vientos with a Tyler McGill and try to get an established starter. A team could look at McGill as an option for them to be a starting pitcher that can fill into the rotation immediately with more control, while getting the high upside prospects that make it worth it to move off of a frontline starter. But that's really where I'm at here. DeGrom's the priority. If not him, either Rodon or Verlander, and you got to find a way to either retain Chris Bassett as your 3 starter in the playoffs or get a better one who you would just think has an opportunity to really go out and win you a ball game. That's where I look at the Pablo Lopez thing and I say no on Baty and Alvarez, because I don't necessarily think Pablo Lopez is that much better than just retaining Chris Bassett as a free agent. I think Glasnow and Woodruff present a higher ceiling there. Now, the bullpen is a massive question mark. We just discussed Edwin Diaz on Monday's show. Beyond him, though, what else do the Mets have to do to build out a competent bullpen? Who is returning? Who is leaving? We'll discuss all of that after a quick word from our sponsors. How many relief pitchers can we pen in, not pencil in, pen in to the Mets bullpen next season? Guys we know that are going to be there. There's two names right now. And really one of them I might put in pencil. And the one in pencil would be Joely Rodriguez. The Mets have control of him actually for 3 more years. He's just hitting arbitration. So considering he's a left-handed reliever that does have really good advanced metrics and peripherals because he doesn't give up very much loud contact. He kept the ball in the yard. I see Joely Rodriguez likely being back. Now, Drew Smith is the one that I have penned in. He will definitely be in the Mets bullpen next season. Beyond that, though, the free agents, Edwin Diaz, Seth Lugo, Trevor May, Adam Ottavino, Trevor Williams, Michael Givens potentially. Givens has a $3.5 million mutual option. If he decides to accept his end of that, if you're the Mets, you might as well just keep bird in hand. He's been a good relief pitcher for a long time. $3.5 million is nothing considering the luxury tax bill the Mets are going to put out there anyway. That's not going to move the needle in that regard. So bring back Givens. That gives you Givens, Smith, Joely. I think Edwin Diaz is a likely re-sign. That gives you 4 arms in that bullpen. What do you do with Seth Lugo and Adam Ottavino? I would hope they bring either of them back, if not both. Trevor May, I think, is a buy low guy at this point, considering the season he just had. I don't think he's going to make anywhere near the amount of money. And I do think he's worthy of bringing back if he wants to continue to pitch with the Mets. But we really don't know what these guys value, and we'll really understand that more once they test the open market and can see what they can get out there. So we'll see who comes back from those guys. Trevor Williams would be amazing in a Mets uniform again. He had a great season as a swingman. I think he probably wants to be a starting pitcher again, though. You know, he had a good enough year where I'm sure, thinks highly of himself enough to believe that he can be a full-time starter for a team. And there's got to be teams out there that look at the season he had and say, yeah, we want you eating innings for us. There's a lot of rebuilding teams. If you're the Washington Nationals, why wouldn't you spend a little bit extra to acquire Trevor Williams just to be one of those guys that can be on the mound for you and get you through a 162-game season? I think he's likely gone. So where else can the Mets go from here when it comes to the free agent market? Michael Fulmer coming back to the organization would be awesome. He had a really nice year. Chris Martin, we were discussing xFIP the other day, expected fielding independent pitching. The second best xFIP in baseball behind Edwin Diaz belonged to Chris Martin. He's a little bit older, but that's an option. You have all the closers, and Kenley Jansen, Aroldis Chapman, Craig Kimbrell. Wouldn't want any of them personally unless they really drop down in price. And even then, I don't think any of them are great fits, assuming you retain Diaz. And even if you don't, I don't think any of them is a good enough replacement for Edwin Diaz. You might have to go into the trade market to get a closer if you don't bring Diaz back. That is why you have to retain him. Now, beyond that, you got Rafael Montero, another former Met who's actually in the World Series right now as a key cog in that Astros bullpen. He's about to get paid. Will the Mets be the team to pay him? I don't know. David Robertson in the Phillies bullpen right now. I don't think he's going to command too much, and he would be a nice option for the Mets. They really did have a ton of interest in him at the trade deadline, so that is interesting. Robert Suarez really did sort of burst onto the scene when it comes to national attention during the playoffs as the complement to Josh Hader at the back end of that Padres bullpen. $5 million player option. I'm sure he's going to want to hit free agency off of this season because he should be able to command more or at least a 2 or 3 year deal. He has really good stuff, so I like Suarez a lot. If the Mets could bring back, Diaz and Lugo, and they went out and they got Suarez and Fulmer, I'd feel fantastic about their bullpen. I really would. Other names to look at, lefties, Sean Doolittle and Brad Hand. Veterans that I think can still be competent arms for you in the bullpen. I don't know if I really trust them as late inning guys anymore, but I think that they would be nice options for sure. So those are some of the names that are out there. When it comes to internal growth, I mean, Bryce Montes de Aca we saw this season. He has really high-end stuff, so I can imagine a world where he ends up in the bullpen. And, I think that there's probably a couple other prospects that are escaping me off the top of my head here that could be in the mix, but you don't necessarily want to lean on those guys, at this juncture. You don't want to go into spring training expecting much out of the Bryce Montes-Diakas of the world, because that's your depth. That's where you hope your depth can fill in, because there's always going to be injuries and ineffectiveness in your bullpen arms. Right now with two guys set in stone with Joely and Drew, I think you need to probably add 5 arms in free agency at least to fill out that bullpen, Diaz being the most important one, and then you sort of fill out the rest of it as you go. But the Mets definitely have to rebuild the bullpen. That's what most teams do in the offseason, though, so I wouldn't be too concerned about it. I'm sure there will be a plan that will be put in place, and there will be a lot of new faces out there in 2023. Anyway, that was my full offseason outlook on the New York Mets. It's replacing Nimmo. It's adding 2 high-end starters to the rotation, and it's completely building out a bullpen. The Mets can do all those things if they get internal growth with their rookies that just debuted this past season. We could see a very successful campaign for the Mets in 2023. But that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Tomorrow's show, Michael Conforto returning. Going to be a fun one. Make sure you follow, rate, and review. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Locked On Sports Today is available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.